You can't do this here. I'm calling the cops. Officer, I'm not the criminal. He is. He didn't follow my HOA rules.
The woman planted herself directly in front of my wife like a human roadblock, arms crossed over her chest, chin lifted with the arrogance of someone who genuinely believed she owned the entire neighborhood. Her floral blazer screamed middle management power trip, and her perfectly styled blonde bob did not move a single millimeter in the afternoon breeze. Behind her, through the doorway of what was legally, officially, and completely our new home, I could see the movers frozen in place, furniture suspended in midair, everyone waiting to see how this insane standoff would end. She looked at my wife Mia with pure contempt, then shifted that venomous gaze to me, and in a voice dripping with condescension, said the words that would launch the most ridiculous battle of my entire life. I do not care what papers you think you have. Nobody moves into this neighborhood without my personal approval, and I have not approved you yet. That was my grand introduction to Karen Petton, the self-proclaimed Empress of Willowbrook Estates, president of the HOA for 7 tyrannical years, and the woman who was about to learn the hardest lesson of her entire existence. She thought she could stop us from moving into our own home. She thought her little clipboard and her folder full of fake regulations gave her the power of a medieval gatekeeper. She thought wrong. By the end of this day, she would be sitting in the back of a police cruiser, hands cuffed behind her back, watching her entire kingdom crumble while the neighbors she had terrorized for years cheered from their front lawns. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment when my wife and I made the decision that would lead us straight into the crosshairs of the most delusional HOA president in suburban history. My name is Alex, and 3 months before that confrontation on my front porch, Mia and I had done something that millions of young couples dream about. We bought our first home. It had taken us years of saving, sacrificing, and scraping together every spare penny. We had skipped vacations, driven used cars into the ground, eaten more rice and beans than I care to remember. But finally, we had enough for a down payment on a modest house in what seemed like the perfect neighborhood. Willowbrook Estates sat on the edge of town, a quiet subdivision of well-maintained homes with manicured lawns and tree-lined streets. The schools were excellent. The crime rate was practically non-existent. The houses were priced just within our reach if we stretched our budget to its absolute limit. Our real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Denise who wore too much perfume and smiled too broadly, had shown us the property on a sunny Saturday afternoon. The house itself was nothing fancy, a 3-bedroom ranch built in the 90s with a decent backyard and a 2-car garage. But to Mia and me, it was a palace. It was ours. Denise mentioned casually that the neighborhood had an active homeowners association. They keep the neighborhood beautiful, she said with that too-wide smile. Property values stay stable. Everyone pitches in to maintain community standards. It sounded harmless enough, maybe even beneficial. What she conveniently forgot to mention was that the HOA was run by a woman who treated every resident like a subject in her personal fiefdom, who enforced unwritten rules that existed only in her imagination, and who had spent 7 years transforming a simple community organization into her own private dictatorship. We closed on the house on a Friday afternoon in late September. The signing took place at a title company downtown, in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and legal documents. Mia and I signed our names approximately 47,000 times, initialed another 47,000 times, and handed over a cashier's check that represented every dollar we had managed to save over the past 5 years. When it was done, when the title company representative slid the keys across the table toward us, Mia actually cried. Happy tears, the kind that come from achieving something you have worked so hard for. I might have gotten a little misty-eyed myself, though I will deny it if anyone asks. We drove straight to our new house after the closing, even though we were not moving in until the following weekend. We just wanted to stand in the empty rooms and soak it in. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting golden rectangles on the bare floors. Mia walked through each room, already planning where the furniture would go, which wall would hold our wedding photos, where we would put the Christmas tree in December. I do not think I had ever seen her so happy. We had no idea what was coming. The day of our move started out absolutely perfect. The weather was ideal, warm but not too hot, with a clear blue sky and just enough breeze to keep things comfortable. The moving truck arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, right on schedule. Tony, the head mover, was a broad-shouldered guy in his 50s who had been doing this job for over 2 decades. His crew of 3 younger men moved with the efficiency of people who had loaded and unloaded 1,000 trucks. Mia and I followed the truck in our car, practically vibrating with excitement. We had taken the entire week off work to get settled. We had planned every detail, from the order in which boxes would be unpacked to which pizza place we would order from for our first dinner in our new home. As we pulled into the driveway of our house, I remember looking at Mia and seeing my own joy reflected in her eyes. This was it, the moment we had been working toward for years, our first real home. Our future. That feeling of pure, uncomplicated happiness lasted exactly 15 minutes. The movers had just started unloading boxes when I noticed movement from the house next door. A woman emerged from the front entrance and began walking toward us with the determined stride of a general approaching enemy lines. She was in her mid-50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that had been styled and sprayed into absolute immobility. Her makeup was perfect in that aggressive way. Foundation too thick, blush too pink, lipstick red enough to signal ships at sea. She wore pressed khaki pants and a floral blazer that somehow managed to look both casual and authoritarian at the same time. In one hand, she carried a clipboard. In the other, a stuffed folder that looked like it contained enough paperwork to run a small government. Her heels clicked against the pavement with each step, a rhythmic warning like a rattlesnake's rattle. When she reached the edge of our driveway, she stopped and surveyed the scene with the critical eye of a drill sergeant inspecting new recruits. "Excuse me," she called out in a voice that could have cut glass. "You need to stop what you are doing immediately. You cannot proceed with this move until I have reviewed your application and conducted the proper vetting procedures." Tony, who had been in the middle of carrying a box marked kitchen fragile, froze in his tracks. He looked at the woman, looked at me, looked back at the woman. His expression clearly said that in 23 years of moving furniture, he had never encountered anything quite like this. Trying to defuse what I assumed was simply a misunderstanding, I walked over with my best friendly, non-confrontational smile. The kind of smile you give to a confused elderly person or an overly aggressive parking attendant. "Hi there," I said warmly. "I am Alex, and this is my wife Mia. We closed on the house last Friday. I think there might be some confusion here. We are the new owners." I even pulled out our closing documents, the ones we had brought specifically to show utility companies when we set up new accounts. I held them out toward her like an offering, like proof that we belonged here, like surely this would clear everything up. She barely glanced at the papers before waving them away with a dismissive flick of her manicured fingers. "I do not care what some bank told you," she said with a level of arrogance that took my breath away. "This is my neighborhood, and I have procedures. You should have contacted me weeks ago to begin the approval process. Since you failed to do that, you will need to remove your belongings immediately and return after you have completed the proper paperwork." I stared at her, genuinely unable to process what I was hearing. For a moment, I wondered if this was some kind of elaborate prank, if maybe friends had hired an actress to play a crazy neighbor as a moving day joke. But no one jumped out laughing. No cameras appeared. The woman just stood there, clipboard clutched like a weapon, waiting for us to comply with her insane demand. Mia stepped forward. My wife is possibly the calmest person I have ever known. She works as a pediatric nurse, dealing with sick children and stressed parents all day long. It takes a lot to ruffle her feathers, but I could see something building behind her composed expression, a storm gathering on the horizon. "Ma'am," she said in that measured, polite tone she uses right before she completely loses patience, "I think you might be confused about how property ownership works. We legally own this house. We have the deed. We do not need anyone's permission or approval to live in our own home." The woman's face flushed a shade of red that almost matched her lipstick. Her eyes went wide with a mixture of rage and disbelief, as if Mia had just slapped her across the face instead of simply stating a basic legal fact. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she shrieked, her voice rising to a pitch that probably disturbed dogs 3 blocks away. I am Karen Petton, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I have the authority to keep undesirable elements from disrupting our community standards. You are not moving another single item into that house until I say so. Before we go any further with this story, I need to ask you something. If you believe that people like Karen exist in real life, and trust me, they absolutely do, and if you believe they need to be held accountable for their behavior, then I want you to do something for me right now. Subscribe to this channel. We share stories exactly like this one every single day. Stories about ordinary people standing up to bullies and tyrants. Stories about karma delivering justice in the most satisfying ways imaginable. These stories will change how you see the world, and I promise they will satisfy that deep need we all have to see entitled people get exactly what they deserve. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our community of people who believe in fighting back against injustice. Now, back to the moment when Karen Petton declared war on my family. She stood there on our driveway like a general who had just claimed enemy territory, clipboard raised like a scepter, folder tucked under her arm like a shield. The movers had completely stopped working, frozen in place with boxes and furniture suspended in their arms, unsure whether to continue or retreat. Up and down the street, I could see curtains twitching and blinds shifting. Neighbors were emerging onto porches, pretending to check their mail or water their plants while actually watching the spectacle unfold. Some of them were smiling, not friendly smiles, but the satisfied smiles of people who had been waiting a long time to see someone stand up to the neighborhood tyrant. I tried one more time to be reasonable. Look, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. There seems to be a misunderstanding here. We bought this house through a licensed realtor. We went through a title company. Everything was done legally and properly. We do not need your approval to move into property that we own. Karen's response was to step directly in front of Tony, who was still holding a box, and place her hand on it like she was physically stopping him from taking another step. You are not listening, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I do not care about your paperwork. I do not care about your realtor or your title company. This is Willowbrook Estates. I have been president of this HOA for 7 years. Nothing happens in this neighborhood without my knowledge and my approval. If you want to live here, you will follow my procedures. Tony shot me a look that clearly said, buddy, is this real life, or am I having some kind of fever dream? He had probably dealt with every kind of neighbor craziness imaginable in his 2 decades of moving furniture, but this was clearly a new level even for him. Lady, he said, his patience visibly wearing thin, I do not know what your deal is, but these folks hired me to move their stuff into this house. That is exactly what I am going to do. Whatever neighborhood drama this is, it can wait until after I am finished. Karen's eyes went wide with outrage at being dismissed. She pulled out her phone and began dialing with the theatrical flair of someone who believed they were about to call in the cavalry. That is it, she announced loudly enough for the entire block to hear. I am calling the police. These people are trespassing on private property, and this moving company is participating in illegal activity. You will all be arrested. She said it with absolute conviction, like she truly believed that we were criminals invading her territory. Like she genuinely thought the police would show up and haul us away in handcuffs for the crime of moving into our own home. Something in me snapped at that moment. I had been trying so hard to stay calm, to de-escalate, to find some reasonable solution to this completely unreasonable situation. But hearing her threaten to have us arrested, watching her stand there with that smug expression like she had already won, something inside me broke free. The sarcastic, unfiltered part of my personality that I usually keep carefully contained roared to the surface. You know what, Karen, I said loudly, making sure every single eavesdropping neighbor could hear me clearly. You are absolutely right. We should definitely call the police. Here, let me help you with that. I pulled out my own phone, dialed 911 right there on the front porch, and put it on speaker so everyone could hear. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher asked in that calm, professional tone they all seemed to share. Hi, I said, never breaking eye contact with Karen. I need to report harassment and illegal obstruction of private property. A woman is physically preventing my family from accessing our legally owned home. She is threatening our movers and making false reports about trespassing. We are at 1234 Willowbrook Lane. Karen's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The confident, aggressive expression drained away, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. She was still holding her phone, still frozen in the act of calling for backup, but suddenly she did not seem so eager to complete that call. The dispatcher asked me to describe the situation, and I explained everything calmly and clearly. I gave them our names, confirmed that we had legal ownership documents, explained that Karen was physically blocking our access to our property. The dispatcher assured me that officers would arrive within 10 minutes and advised us not to escalate the situation further. Around us, the audience of neighbors had grown significantly. People were not even pretending to do yard work anymore. They were standing openly on their lawns, watching the show. A few had their phones out, recording the encounter. From the expressions on their faces, it was clear that this was not the first time Karen had caused a scene in this neighborhood. Several people were outright smiling, clearly enjoying watching someone finally stand up to her. Karen, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. She had lowered her phone and was rifling through her folder of paperwork, muttering about regulations and procedures as if she could somehow conjure up legal authority from a collection of documents. Every few seconds, she would shoot me a look that was equal parts panic and fury. A predator who had suddenly realized she had bitten off far more than she could chew. "You have no idea who you are messing with," she hissed at me, her voice low and threatening. "I have connections in this town. I know people on the city council. I know people in the police department. You are going to regret this for the rest of your life. I have made sure plenty of people regretted crossing me. I will make your life a living hell." Mia stepped up beside me and took my hand. We faced Karen together, a united front against her bullying. "Ma'am," Mia said, her voice steady and calm, "we are not intimidated by your threats. We are not going anywhere. This is our home, and we are going to live in it whether you like it or not. If you have connections at the police department, I am sure they are on their way right now to explain to you how property law works." The police cruiser arrived exactly 9 minutes later. It rolled down the quiet suburban street with its lights off, clearly not treating this as an emergency, but definitely taking it seriously. Two officers stepped out. One was young, probably fresh out of the academy, with that eager, slightly nervous energy of someone still learning the ropes. The other was a woman in her 40s, with calm, steady eyes, and the kind of unflappable demeanor that only comes from years of dealing with every kind of human nonsense imaginable. She wore sergeant stripes on her sleeve and moved with the easy confidence of someone who had seen it all. Karen immediately rushed toward them like a drowning woman spotting a life raft. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," she said in a completely different voice than the one she had been using with us. Gone was the shrieking harridan. In her place was a concerned citizen, all sweetness and light. "These people are trying to move into a house without proper authorization. They are violating multiple HOA regulations and refusing to follow established community procedures. I have been trying to explain the rules to them, but they are being very aggressive and threatening. I had to call for help." The older officer, whose name tag read Martinez, held up a hand to stop Karen's monologue. "Good afternoon, folks," she said in a neutral, professional tone. "I am Officer Martinez, and this is Officer Johnson. We received a call about some kind of property dispute. Can someone tell me what is going on here?" I stepped forward with all of our documentation. I had the closing papers, the deed, our IDs, the homeowner's insurance documents, everything we had brought with us to set up utilities and transfer services. "We purchased this house," I explained calmly. "We closed last Friday. Today is our scheduled move-in day. That woman has been blocking our access to the property, threatening our movers, and insisting that we need her personal approval to live in our own home." Officer Martinez took the documents and studied them carefully. Her partner, Officer Johnson, pulled out a notepad and began taking notes. The papers were all in order, everything exactly as it should be, proof positive that Mia and I were the legal owners of this property. Meanwhile, Karen hovered a few feet away, clutching her folder of HOA documents like it contained the answers to all life's questions. She kept interrupting, trying to explain her side, pointing at various pages in her folder. Officer Martinez finally turned to address her directly. "Ma'am," she said patiently, "do you have any legal documentation that gives you the right to prevent these homeowners from accessing their property?" Karen's eyes lit up with triumph. She pulled out a thick stack of papers from her folder and presented them like a lawyer presenting evidence in a murder trial. "Right here," she declared. "Section 4, subsection 2, paragraph C of the Willowbrook Estates HOA bylaws clearly states that all new residents must complete an approval process before taking up occupancy. I'm the president of this association, and I have not approved these people." Officer Martinez took the papers and read through them carefully. The silence stretched on for nearly a full minute while she reviewed the documents. Karen stood there with a smug smile on her face, absolutely certain that she was about to be vindicated. Then Officer Martinez looked up, and her expression was completely unimpressed. "Ma'am," she said flatly, "these HOA bylaws do not give you any legal authority to deny homeowners access to their own property. These regulations cover landscaping requirements, paint colors, architectural guidelines, things like that. There is nothing in here that gives you the right to stop someone from moving into a home they legally own. You cannot supersede property law with an HOA rule book." Karen's smug expression faltered. But I am the president," she stammered. "I have a responsibility to protect community standards. I have to make sure the right kind of people move into this neighborhood. These people could be anyone. They could be criminals. They could be drug dealers. They could be running some kind of illegal operation. I am protecting my neighbors." Officer Johnson, the younger officer, looked up from his notepad. "Ma'am, are you refusing to allow the legal homeowners to access their property?" His tone was carefully neutral, but there was an edge to it now. "I'm not refusing anything," Karen said defensively. "I am simply following procedures. I am protecting this neighborhood. Someone has to maintain standards around here. Someone has to make sure that just anyone cannot waltz in and destroy what we have built. There are processes for a reason." Officer Martinez sighed heavily, the sigh of someone whose patience was being tested to its limit. "Ma'am," she said firmly, "I need you to step away from this property right now. These people have every legal right to move into their home. If you continue to interfere with that, I will arrest you for harassment and obstruction." Karen's eyes went wide. She looked at the officers, then at me, then at the growing crowd of neighbors who were watching with barely concealed glee. For a moment, it seemed like reality was finally starting to penetrate her delusion. She took a few steps backward, retreating toward her own property. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "But this is not over. I'm going to file complaints with the city. I'm going to call my lawyer. I'm going to contact every official I know. You people have no idea what kind of mistake you are making. Do you have any idea how long I have been keeping this neighborhood safe? Do you have any idea what would happen if people like you were just allowed to move in without any oversight?" For about 20 beautiful minutes, it seemed like the crisis was over. The officers watched as Karen retreated to her property, still muttering about regulations and standards. Tony and his crew went back to work, carrying our furniture and boxes into the house. Mia and I stood on our new porch, arms around each other, watching our belongings disappear through the front door. Maybe, just maybe, we could actually start our new life in peace. Officer Martinez returned our documents with a sympathetic smile. "Sorry about all that," she said quietly. "We get calls about this neighborhood more often than you would think. That woman has been a problem for years, but nobody has ever pressed charges. If she bothers you again, do not hesitate to call." She handed me her card, and then she and Officer Johnson headed back to their cruiser. As they pulled away, I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Mia squeezed my hand. "That was insane," she said, her voice still a little shaky. "Do you think she's going to cause more problems?" I looked over at Karen's house. She was standing at her living room window, watching us with an expression of pure malice. "Probably," I admitted, "but we are not going anywhere. This is our home, and no HOA tyrant is going to change that." We were about to find out just how true that statement would have to be. Exactly 23 minutes after the police left, Karen re-emerged from her house. This time, she came armed like a bureaucratic bounty hunter on a mission of petty vengeance. She had a measuring tape in one hand, a camera in the other, and a citation book tucked under her arm. She marched straight toward the moving truck that was still parked at our curb, Tony's crew still unloading the last of our larger furniture. She began photographing the truck from every angle, measuring the distance from the curb with her tape measure, scribbling notes on her clipboard like a particularly aggressive parking enforcement officer. The neighbors who had started to drift back to their own yards stopped and turned to watch again. The show, apparently, was not over. "Excuse me," Karen announced in her most officious voice, loudly enough for everyone on the block to hear. "This moving vehicle is parked illegally." HOA regulations clearly state that commercial vehicles cannot be parked on residential streets for more than 30 minutes without a special permit. You have been here for over an hour. If this truck is not moved immediately, I am having it towed. I walked over, fighting to keep my voice calm, even though my blood pressure was probably reaching dangerous levels. "Karen, the police were just here. They told you to leave us alone. What exactly do you think you are doing?" She looked at me with a smile that was equal parts sweet and poisonous. "I'm not doing anything to you," she said innocently. "I am simply enforcing legitimate HOA regulations regarding vehicle parking. This is a completely separate issue from your moving. If the truck does not move in the next 5 minutes, I am calling a tow company." She already had her phone out, already dialing. Her vindictiveness was almost impressive in a twisted, pathological way. She could not stop us from moving in, so now she was going to try to have our moving truck towed with all of our belongings still inside it. I pulled out my own phone. "You know what, Karen," I said, matching her sweet tone. "You are absolutely right. Let us make sure we are doing everything by the book. I'm going to call the authorities one more time, just to make absolutely sure everyone is following the proper procedures." I dialed 911 for the second time that day, a personal record I had never wanted to set and hoped to never break. The dispatcher recognized my voice. Same address from earlier. She asked with what sounded like a trace of amusement. "Yes, ma'am," I confirmed. "The same woman who was harassing us earlier is now trying to have our moving truck towed illegally. She was already warned by officers to leave us alone, but she is escalating the situation." Officer Martinez arrived alone this time, and the expression on her face made it clear she was not amused. She stepped out of her cruiser with the weary resignation of someone whose day had just gotten significantly longer. Karen was still on the phone, presumably with the towing company, when she spotted the returning police car. The color drained from her face so quickly it was almost comical. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez called out as she approached. "Did I not explain to you less than half an hour ago that you need to leave these people alone?" Karen lowered her phone, but did not hang up. "I'm not harassing anyone," she said defensively. "I'm enforcing parking regulations. Their truck is illegally parked according to our community bylaws. As HOA president, I have the authority and the responsibility to ensure that all vehicles comply with our regulations. This is a completely legitimate enforcement action." Officer Martinez walked slowly around the moving truck, examining everything. She checked the distance from the curb. She looked for any no parking signs or fire hydrants. She even got on her radio and verified the city's parking regulations with dispatch. When she was done, she turned to face Karen with an expression that suggested her patience had reached its absolute limit. "Ma'am, this vehicle is parked completely legally," she said flatly. "It is on a public street, outside the no parking zones, and in full compliance with city regulations. Your HOA bylaws do not and cannot override city parking laws. You have no authority to have a legally parked vehicle towed from a public street. If you proceed with this, you will be liable for any damages and could face charges for filing false reports." Karen sputtered, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words. But the regulations clearly state," she started. Officer Martinez held up her hand. "Ma'am, I am telling you for the final time. Leave these people alone. If I have to come back here again, I will not be as patient." That was the moment Karen made the mistake that would end her reign of terror forever. Whether it was frustration, arrogance, or simply an inability to accept that she was not actually in charge of the universe, something inside her snapped. "I do not care what you say," she shouted, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. This is my neighborhood. I have been running this community for 7 years. I decide who lives here. I decide what rules get followed. These people are not welcome, and I will do whatever it takes to get rid of them. They do not belong here, and no amount of paperwork or police intervention is going to change that. I will make their lives so miserable they will be begging to leave within a month. The moment the words left her mouth, I could see her realize she had gone too far. Officer Martinez's expression shifted from annoyance to something harder and more official. She reached for the handcuffs on her belt. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for harassment and obstruction of property rights," she said in a voice that brooked no argument. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights?" Karen's transformation was almost pitiful to watch. The arrogant, controlling tyrant melted away, replaced by a confused, frightened woman who could not believe what was happening. "You cannot arrest me," she protested weakly as Officer Martinez secured the handcuffs around her wrists. "I am the HOA president. I was just protecting the neighborhood. I was doing my job. These people are the ones breaking the law. They are the ones who should be arrested. Being HOA president does not give you the right to harass people or prevent them from accessing their legally owned property," Officer Martinez said calmly, guiding Karen toward the back of the police cruiser. "You were warned multiple times to stop, and you chose to escalate instead. That is on you." As Officer Martinez opened the back door of the cruiser and helped Karen inside, the neighbors who had been watching erupted into spontaneous applause. Not polite golf clapping, but genuine, enthusiastic cheering. People were actually celebrating on their front lawns, high-fiving each other, laughing with relief. A man about my age jogged over from 3 houses down. "Finally," he said, shaking my hand vigorously, "I am Tom. I have lived here for 12 years, and that woman has made my life a living hell the entire time. You are a hero for finally standing up to her." A woman with grey hair and a kind face followed close behind him. "I am Margaret," she said, her eyes misty with emotion. "She tried to fine me $2,000 last year because my roses grew over the property line by 3 inches. 3 inches. I had to hire a lawyer just to prove she had no authority to do that. Thank you. Thank you so much for not backing down." Tony, who had been watching the entire drama unfold while still holding a floor lamp, finally set it down and walked over. "In 23 years of moving furniture," he said, shaking his head in disbelief, "I have never seen anything like that. Not even close." He paused and looked at the police car pulling away with Karen in the back seat. "But I have to say, that was the most satisfying end to a moving day I have ever witnessed." His crew members were grinning, clearly entertained by the unexpected drama that had accompanied what should have been a routine job. One of them gave me a thumbs up as he headed back to the truck to grab more boxes. Over the next few hours, as the movers finished unloading and our new neighbors kept stopping by to introduce themselves, we heard story after story about Karen's reign of terror. She had fined a family $500 because their daughter's bicycle was visible in the driveway for more than 4 hours. She had demanded that a retired veteran remove his American flag because it was not on the approved flagpole list. She had sent cease and desist letters to homeowners whose children made too much noise while playing in their own backyards. She had organized campaigns to drive out families she deemed undesirable, spreading rumors, filing false complaints with the city, doing everything in her power to make their lives unbearable until they finally gave up and moved away. She had been doing this for 7 years, and nobody had ever successfully challenged her. Until now. The aftermath of Karen's arrest was even more satisfying than the arrest itself. She was charged with harassment, obstruction of property rights, and making false reports to emergency services. The total fines came to over $3,000, plus she was required to complete a community service program and attend anger management classes. More importantly, her arrest triggered an emergency meeting of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board. I was invited to attend, along with dozens of other neighbors who had suffered under Karen's rule. The meeting was held in the community center, a modest building near the entrance of the subdivision. When Mia and I arrived, the room was already packed. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls, crowded near the doorways. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of anger at years of abuse and hope that change was finally possible. The acting board president, a soft-spoken man named Harold who had served as treasurer under Karen, called the meeting to order. Given the recent events, he began nervously, "We need to discuss the future leadership of this association. As you are all aware, Karen Petton was arrested yesterday for harassing new homeowners and obstructing their property rights. This is, obviously, a serious matter that reflects poorly on our entire community." What followed was 2 hours of testimony from neighbors who had been victimized by Karen over the years. One by one, they stood up and shared their stories: the fines for trivial violations, the threats and intimidation, the surveillance and spying, the campaigns of harassment designed to drive people out of the neighborhood. By the time everyone had spoken, it was clear that Karen's behavior had not been an isolated incident, but a pattern of abuse spanning most of her 7-year tenure. The vote to remove Karen from the presidency was not even close. 87 votes in favor of removal, 3 votes against, presumably from her closest allies. Her reign was officially over. The board then voted to conduct a comprehensive review of all fines issued during Karen's presidency, with the intention of refunding any that had been issued improperly. They also voted to rewrite the HOA bylaws to prevent any future president from accumulating the kind of unchecked power Karen had wielded. Several neighbors came up to shake my hand afterward. I had become something of a local celebrity, the man who had finally brought down the tyrant. It was a strange feeling, being thanked for simply refusing to be bullied out of my own home. But the drama was not quite over. Karen showed up at the meeting just as it was ending, apparently having been released on bail earlier that day. She burst through the community center doors like a woman possessed, her carefully styled hair now disheveled, her makeup smeared, her designer blazer wrinkled and stained. "You cannot do this," she screamed, her voice echoing through the now quiet room. "I built this community. I made Willowbrook Estates what it is. Without me, property values will plummet. The neighborhood will be destroyed. You are all making a terrible mistake. You will come crawling back, begging me to fix the mess you have created." 2 members of the board's newly formed security committee, both large men who had clearly been waiting for this moment, approached her calmly. "Ma'am," Harold said firmly, "you are no longer welcome at HOA meetings. If you do not leave voluntarily, we will call the police again." Karen looked around the room, searching for allies, for anyone who might come to her defense. But every face she saw was either hostile or simply tired. The people she had terrorized for years were finally free, and none of them had any intention of going back under her thumb. "This is not over," she hissed as the security volunteers escorted her toward the door. "I will sue every single one of you. I will take you all to court. You have no idea who you are dealing with." The door closed behind her, cutting off her threats mid-sentence. The room was silent for a moment, and then someone started clapping. The applause spread through the crowd, building into a standing ovation. For the first time in 7 years, Willowbrook Estates was free. The months that followed were transformative for our little neighborhood. The new board, led by a retired teacher named Dorothy, who had been one of Karen's most frequent targets, implemented sweeping reforms. The Byzantine system of fines and violations was simplified and made transparent. A resident review committee was established to hear appeals. Most importantly, the culture of fear and surveillance that Karen had cultivated was systematically dismantled. Neighbors actually started talking to each other again, not to report violations, but to build genuine friendships. Block parties returned after a 7-year hiatus. A community garden was established on a vacant lot that Karen had always insisted be left empty. Children played in the streets without their parents worrying about getting fined for noise violations. As for Karen herself, her fate was appropriately ironic. Her legal troubles mounted as more and more former targets came forward with evidence of her misconduct. She was forced to pay restitution to multiple families she had wrongfully fined over the years. Her lawyer's fees depleted her savings, and when the full extent of her behavior became public knowledge, her reputation in the broader community was destroyed. She tried to join the HOA of her new neighborhood after moving away, and they rejected her application, having heard about her history from mutual acquaintances. The woman who had spent 7 years deciding who was worthy of living in her neighborhood was now being judged by the very standards she had imposed on others. Last I heard, she was living in an apartment complex with no homeowners association at all, completely stripped of the petty power she had wielded for so long. Mia and I settled into our new home with a peace we had not expected to find so quickly. The house that had been the site of such conflict on our very first day became our sanctuary. We painted the walls colors we loved without worrying about HOA approval. We planted a garden in the backyard and let it grow a little wild around the edges. We hung an American flag on our porch, on a flagpole that definitely was not on any approved list. Every morning I wake up in that house, I am grateful. Grateful that we did not back down. Grateful that we stood our ground. Grateful that sometimes, when you refuse to be bullied, the bullies are the ones who end up losing everything. The day we moved in, a woman tried to stop us from entering our own home because she thought her clipboard gave her more authority than our legal deed. She threatened us with arrest. She tried to have our moving truck towed. She promised to make our lives a living hell. Instead, she ended up in handcuffs, removed from power, and forced to confront the consequences of years of tyrannical behavior. It was not the housewarming we had planned, but in a strange way, it was exactly the introduction we needed. We learned immediately that our new neighbors were good people who had been living under the thumb of a petty dictator. We learned that standing up to bullies, even when it is scary, even when the outcome is uncertain, is always the right thing to do. And we learned that sometimes, karma works faster than you would ever expect. If you enjoyed this story, if it inspired you, if it made you believe that justice is still possible in a world that sometimes seems stacked against ordinary people, then I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. We share content like this every single day, real accounts of people standing up to entitled bullies, Karen confrontations, HOA nightmares, and the sweet taste of victory when the good guys finally win. These stories are not just entertainment. They are reminders that you do not have to accept being pushed around. They are proof that bullies can be defeated. They are inspiration for the moment when you might need to stand your ground. So join our community. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us about your own experience with a Karen or an out-of-control HOA. And remember, no matter how powerful a bully seems, no matter how much authority they claim to have, the law is still the law, and the truth is still the truth. Karen Petton learned that lesson the hard way, in handcuffs, in the back of a police car, while her former victims cheered from their front lawns. And Mia and I learned something too. We learned that the home we bought was worth fighting for, and that sometimes the fight itself is what makes a house truly feel like home.